Thank you, Juliana, for inviting me to participate and to coordinate, I guess, the works today. So when Juliana approached me, I was wondering what would be relevant to talk about collegially amongst colleagues. And I thought, given that we've been undergoing so many different crises, I thought that the most honest question to pose to all of my colleagues and myself, really, was to think and reflect and discuss what does it mean to operate and to do what we do at times of crisis. And of course, I'm thinking about crisis in a very complex way or holistic way, because we know that there's not a single crisis. It's not only the pandemic. There has been numerous events, and some of these issues are actually ongoing. And my curiosity and my reflection is really how these circumstances and how these instances are shaping the work that we do, but also shaping the human being that we are and how we operate in society. So I invited a number of speakers, and I'm really thankful to all of them to have accepted our invitation, to share personal stories and to really share with us their own personal experiences, talking as themselves, also in representation of the institutions that they do embody. And I will start today by doing exactly that. I'm going to share with you my own personal experience in organizing the first Yerevan Biennial, which took place across 2020 and 2021. So I hope you're going to enjoy it. The format this year is a bit longer. The contributions, they're going to extend up to 20 minutes in order to enable short conversations at the end of each one contribution. So please stay with me. When one read is always getting a little bit monotonous and boring, but I hope that the subject matter would be strong enough to keep you alive and awake during the presentation. So thank you for joining me. So my presentation is entitled Moving Targets, Context-Responsive Curation in the Face of Adversity. In October 2019, I visited Yerevan with a view of curating the following year, an international art biennial in Armenia's capital city. I was very concerned about the scarcity of time and hesitant to accept the offer. Everything had to be created from scratch, a new organization, a new team, a new infrastructure. New local partnerships and collaborations and international alliances had to be forged. There had been naturally similar initiatives in the country previously, most notably Standard 2017 Triennial in Girumi, curated by Delina von Fürstenberg, and the ongoing International Print Biennale in Yerevan. But this happened to be the first real attempt at creating a permanent organization in the city entirely dedicated to contemporary art and culture, beyond the time limitation of a festival. I was frankly intimidated by the prospect of joining at the last minute such a titanic endeavor, particularly in a country where the art and education are chronically under-resourced. From the outset, the conception and articulation of a biennial exhibition seemed to be the least of our problems. What was lacked was a general framework. The bigger picture was still somehow missing. And yet, the time felt ripe for launching and consecrating Yerevan as a cultural destination with a global appeal, inviting people to explore this unique, little-known country, recontextualizing its reading from a contemporary perspective, and most importantly, offering people of the Armenian diaspora and the world an opportunity to revisit the region, not only retrospectively through the lenses of nostalgia, but looking at its present and its future. The Financial Times had just included Yerevan among the top destinations to visit in 2020, following the inauguration of a brand new airport ready to receive direct flights from several European capitals, which for at least 2 decades, UNESCO had increasingly recognized Armenian tangible and intangible contribution to the cultural heritage of humanity. The excellence of the country's wines and food complemented the seductive and unspoiled tourist offer with the promise of fulfilling the expectation of the most sophisticated travelers. Armenia was the new Georgia, minus the sea, obviously, being an entirely landlocked country. From a Western perspective, the country also felt very safe when compared with neighboring countries such as Iraq, Iran, and even Turkey. Historically considered the last bastion of Christianity, nestled within a geopolitical area characterized by ongoing conflict and instability, Armenia hadn't managed to lose its international appeal even in the aftermath of the 2018 Velvet Revolution, a civil war known to be won without shooting a single bullet, somehow reinforcing the public image of a country on its roadmap towards democracy, peace, and stability. To be fair, after my trip to Yerevan, I was won over too. I instantly fell in love with the country and its people. It is hard to put into words the profound sense of familiarity and estrangement that I experienced during that visit. If a disease called Armeniophilia exists, I might well say that I instantly contracted it without losing sight of the country's many problems, including its homophobia and transphobia, and resistance to acknowledging the fundamental role that Armenian women have played and are still playing in the making of the country. For example, no matter how much I searched, I could not find a single public monument in Yerevan dedicated to a real woman. Almost ironically, in a country whose national emblem is Mother Armenia, a national symbol abstractly embodying ideas of motherhood and a collective sense of belonging that does not naturally account for any of the many individual contributions of actual women whose names, faces, and traces have thus dissolved into oblivion. I sincerely believe that this type of issues can be effectively addressed by and through the soft power of art and culture. As such, I ultimately accepted the invitation to curate the Yerevan Biennial 2020 because I felt that a project like this could help in changing the visual and cultural landscape of the country, harnessing criticality and creativity in the local community and facilitating international dialogue and cultural exchange. My only condition was that I joined the organization permanently as their artistic director, so as to be able to work beyond the time limitations and confinement of the first iteration of the biennial. I immediately understood that the 2020 exhibition would have been only a first attempt, a testbed or a case study, from which we could have collectively learned a lot about the city and its communities. I was willing to accept failure, but this was my opportunity for engaging and imagining and discussing what a new biennial would look like, how it might operate, and what it could achieve. It was too good of an opportunity to pass. I therefore started my new job by creating and consolidating a team, initiating conversation locally, nationally, and internationally. By the time I was about to leave London for my second site visit to Yerevan in early 2020, Italy was already struggling to manage the casualties of the COVID-19 pandemic. I had only just returned from a long work-related journey and was still familiarizing myself with the notion of face mask and hand sanitation as lifesavers when we realized that traveling to Armenia was not advisable. In fact, soon after it became impossible. I'm not going to get too much into the details of what the pandemic meant to us, both as an organization and as a team at that delicate juncture of our project. I'm sure we all share very similar stories. We went through a roller coaster of emotions, from uncertainty to hope, from desperation to determination. As a new art organization, the idea of change was not too shocking for us. We could morph and easily transform into anything we wanted. I believe we were among the first biennials to decide to move fully digital, for example, and to redesign the project entirely and transform it into a digital platform and experience. With no history, we were very much living in the present, and the entire team had embraced risk-taking experimentation as a methodology, the instance they joined in. I do not want to romanticize that moment, but I guess the pandemic, with all of the limitations and implications, made us better. More experimental, more inquisitive, less assertive, and truly open to possibilities. We lived in a permanent state of intellectual alert, as if our senses were augmented in isolation. Our daily Zoom meetings with artists, colleagues, partners became precious moments of profound humanity and intellectual exchange. The pandemic, at that early stage, boosted a renewed sense of solidarity and mutual understanding. On a more practical level, however, we were beginning to see the side effect of the pandemic on our society. For example, we were struggling meeting our fundraising targets. On the other hand, the organization was spending less than expected, so overall, we were still on track. Retrospectively, I think that we were moving very fast and with great agility as a team considering the circumstances, and yet lacking a real infrastructure and not having a physical experience and presence in the city. Part of the curatorial team was scattered around the world with logistic headquarters in Yerevan. We all felt somehow uprooted and disconnected, estranged even, but very busy with our project. As we were tentatively progressing with the organization of the 2020 biennial and articulating it according to different temporalities and developing diverse engagement strategies, my thinking was already projected into the future. I was imagining the Yerevan biennials to come as a physical experience and mentally exploring that dimension. Preemptively thinking about the inevitable risk associated with the regeneration, gentrification and dispossession cycle that cultural events of this scale endorse and facilitate, cultural homologation, the possible tensions with local artistic communities and self-organized grassroots initiatives, ethical funding and sponsorship, the need to forge permanent alliances with local museums and higher education institutions as well as schools. At the same time, I was also asking myself, as things were getting worse, if a second Yerevan Biennial would ever see the light of day. Would we, as an organization, exist in a year's time? Did it even matter? What would have been the impact of our disappearing? What was there to lose? What was there at stake? Who could gain from either our success or failure? Was our determination dictated by the fear of losing our jobs and our individual vanity? Did anybody care about this biennial outside of our team? With the global calendar of art events daily shifting, amongst many postponement and cancellation, finding an official opening day for the launching of our project wasn't an easy task. We ultimately decided that mid-October 2020 was a good period. It felt good to have a date and a final deadline at last. We were tired of aiming at a continuously moving target. That's before the official launch of our digital projects, the conflict with Azerbaijan in the Nagorno-Karabakh region reignited. I knew of the ongoing tensions in the region and the war, but nothing during my direct experience of the country suggested an imminent escalation of violence. We were fully aware of a Cold War ongoing between the two countries on many levels, including the cultural sectors. In Venice too, with Azerbaijan investing significantly in their national pavilion and Armenia responding, animating a silent competition that has oscillated between cultural diplomacy, fighting for international visibility, and art washing. Very early on in our project, we realized, for example, that Azerbaijan has vetoed some people, agencies, and organizations that they had an influence on from collaborating with us. And yet nothing has led us to think that a full war might erupt and that our offices would soon become a refugee camp. As the news of intensification of the conflict arrived, we were pretty much ready to launch with our project, the result of a year of hard work in the face of many adversities. The only way to describe the anticlimax and backlash we experienced in that moment is using a cold shower as a metaphor. We had just violently woken up to enter a nightmare instead of waking up from it. As the days went by, we were increasingly worried for our friends and colleagues in the country. We, those of us who were abroad, could not really tell the gravity of the situation. Information was scarce and imprecise. Not even our people in Yerevan knew exactly what was going on, except that they started first seeing an influx of people coming in, and then explosions getting closer and closer until they were clearly visible from the capital city. We now know that over 6,000 people died during the conflict, more than twice the number of people killed by the attacks of the Twin Towers in New York, and yet nobody really seemed to care. Unlike the present situation in Ukraine, there was no mobilization. People didn't take any side. The international community was silent. The conflict was just not talked about or not even commented on in social media. The silence that became the loudest for me was that of my own community, the so-called art world. After much debating and soul-searching, our team decided to release a statement via eFlux. The first draft, a more emotive response to the conflict, was rejected by the eFlux itself. This is the text that we ultimately disseminated. In response to the current crisis originating in the Nagorno-Karabakh region and in respect of the victims of the conflict and their families, the Yerevan Biennial Art Foundation has decided to cancel the scheduled launch event of its digital biennial. We are mourning particularly civilian casualties. In these tragic circumstances, after much discussion, we decided to unceremoniously make accessible to the public the first chapter of a 2020-21 Yerevan Biennial. The biennial is now online. If only symbolically, it is important to be present and show our humanity. We strongly believe that art, culture, education, and heritage play a vital role in the life of a country. In fact, they express the very essence of a people, as well as the intellectual vitality and uniqueness. Without art, culture, education, and heritage, our collective and individual identity is lost, and the logic of war prevails. We hope to resume further our activity as soon as possible. Meanwhile, we pray for the de-escalation of the conflict and safety of the people. As the UN Secretary Antonio Guterres recently stated, to silence the guns, we must raise the voices for peace. Since the publication of this announcement, the only comment I received was a message of solidarity from Emily Jessir, whom I invited to contribute to this panel. Nobody else officially or unofficially expressed their sympathy or compassion. Not the International Biennial Association, not the many artists, curators, thinkers who seem to have an opinion on everything. But apparently they had known on this regard. In this deafening silence, we operated in a double isolation. That dictated by the specific geography of this war, particularly during a pandemic, and that created around us by the international community, refused to look at what was happening historically and currently, let alone taking sides. As the war in Ukraine is still in progress, I cannot but notice the similarities and differences with the war in Artsakh. Surely the clarities of Putin's intentions, actions and responsibilities is such that it leaves very little room for grey areas of doubt. And yet, if only a small portion of the media attention and global mobilization what we are witnessing today had been directed to the conflict by the Armenian border, maybe some casualties could have been avoided on both sides, and those lives are somehow our responsibility too. Surely being involved in an international project amidst the war is a powerful wake-up call. It makes you question your role and function in society. I believe that art, culture and education are the best tools for radically transforming society by imagining and visualizing new scenarios and tangible alternatives to the system of oppression and inequality in existence. This profound societal transformation takes sometimes years to unravel and ultimately manifest. Under the shelling, however, other more urgent, compelling responses are needed and expected from us. Reality takes center stage. During the tumultuous days around our launch, I gave an interview, which I've only just reread in preparation of this presentation. I concluded the conversation by saying, there is nothing more heartbreaking than watching a child normally packing their school bag to then find out that the day after will not just be a regular day of school, but the first day as a war refugee. It is my belief that our job as cultural operators is to keep the schools open despite the war. But we must be ready to turn them into homes if that is needed. Thank you. So, yeah, I'm a bit emotional thinking about what has happened. And, but what I was trying to address with the paper is that in the face of this adversity, I think individually and collectively as a team, as an organization, we really came to think very deeply and profoundly about what we were doing in ways that would have been unimaginable without this crisis. And so, although obviously, I deprecate everything that happened, and there was something profoundly transforming and enhancing in what has happened. And I think all of us, we probably became better people and better professionals, even through or in the face of these adversities. And I guess this conference is precisely about that. So I don't know if you want to if you have any questions, that's probably the time to address them, maybe very shortly. Otherwise, we're going to move on with the following speakers. And I'm very happy to do some housekeeping and to invite on stage Beral Madra. Thank you.